The following program contains the opinions of the host, guests, and call-in participants. These do not necessarily represent the views of this show's distributors or sponsors. This program may contain obscene, profane, or otherwise objectionable language. Viewer discretion is advised. Hey, coming to you cordless, everybody. It's Tuesday night, April 15th, 2025, and you had to put your taxes in today, didn't you? Well, actually, no, not necessarily. You file an extension. You know that. Then it's October. You put it off. Everyone puts it off. Yeah, but at any rate, the government needs its money. You know that. That's kind of the subject of our show tonight. Oh, it's episode number 221 for those of you keeping score at home. I am Jim Peters, and this is Jim Peters at Night. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. Our guest tonight is our resident economist extraordinaire, Dr. Murray Sabrin. We taped this interview this afternoon. Now, Murray comes on the show regularly. Matter of fact, I think the last time he was on was only 3 weeks ago. Usually, it's about 4 to 6 weeks. But I wanted him to come on specifically to talk about tariffs. And the conversation today is about tariffs and Social Security. And if either one of those things interests you, you should watch this because it's actually, I'm starting to realize that I think Murray likes me to play the devil's advocate. He really kind of steps up to the plate when he gets a little push. So, and I did that today. And we had a really good conversation. And also, he explains Social Security and tariffs way better than a lot of other people can. So stick around for this. Watch this. Our guest, no guest tomorrow. We're taking tomorrow off. We'll be back on Thursday with Jonathan Lockwood, military and space historian. We're going to have a nice time talking to him. I'm fascinated with those subjects, as you might imagine. Also, you'll notice the ticker on the bottom of the screen is not running tonight. We are not going to take phone calls this evening, although there will be a part two because I'm going to do what I call a sermon. So like you guys are worshiping right now. No, I don't think you are. But at any rate, we're going to have a commercial from Conk News here, and then we're going to talk to Murray Sabrin. Stick around. Hi, all. I want to talk to you about Conk News. You've probably heard me talk about this before, but if you're a news junkie, you should try this out. Conk News is a news aggregator. Now, there are plenty of news aggregators on the web, but Conk News is different than all the rest, and here's how. Most other news aggregators will lump the top stories from each news source under that news source. The top 10 stories, like, for example, from Fox News, Breitbart, the New York Post, etc. What Conk News does is it sends its servers out onto the web to over 75 different news sources every 3 hours. And yes, this is an automated process, but in this case, that's actually a good thing. And collects the latest stories from said 75 sources and then lays them out on its own front page in the order they were posted, regardless of the source. So you see the latest stories at the top of the front page, regardless of where they're from. And this is all free to you. You don't need to log in. You don't need to subscribe, register, nothing. It's completely free. All you have to do is go to conk.com to check it out. That's conk.com, 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 Conk News. Joining us from his home in Naples, Florida, it's our resident economist extraordinaire, Murray Sabrin. Murray, now, for people who have never seen you on the show before, I'm going to go through a couple of your credits here. You are the Professor Emeritus of Finance or economics at Ramapo College in New
No,
Jersey. Actually,
finance. You got it right the first time.
oh, I did it again, right? Oh,
Yeah.
well, I know that there's a center there, and the finance center is named after you, right?
Well, it's the Sabrin Center for Free Enterprise.
Right. Okay. All right. So I got a little confused. And you've written about, what have you? We got 7 books right now.
Six books. Some of them are right there.
6 books. Okay. And I decided before we went on here, you come on so regularly now, I'm going to link to one book every time you come on instead of all of them. So you before we're done here, you got to pick which one it is.
Okay.
That might have something to do with what we're talking about. I don't know. Anyway, things are good with you. And also, what does your hat stand for again?
Well, this should be replacing MAGA.
Yeah.
Make Americans Great Again. I don't know what that means. America is a wonderful country, but what we need to do is finish the American Revolution. We had political independence in 1776, fought a bloody revolution. Not me and not you, but maybe your ancestors, not my ancestors.
Not mine either.
We need to make Americans financially independent, and that's what a free society is all about. Not living off the government, which means off of our fellow citizens through taxes, but making sure that we have enough skills or business acumen to open up our own business or to work in a private company or a nonprofit company.
Okay, if we're going to do that, though, then we need some economic education, don't we? I go on and on about this. Americans were the most capitalist country in the world, and we don't teach basic economics in high school. That's nuts.
Well, that's the sad reality of education in America. We don't teach geography. I was a geography minor. My PhD is in economic geography. At one time, I could tell you just about where everything is located in the world because I was taking courses, regional courses, and you'll really get to learn about the culture, the topography, the economy. And geography is a wonderful subject, especially if you just look at a map and try to figure out what's going on in those places. So geography is a lost subject in American schools, and I wish we could bring it back.
I don't know if you've heard this. As someone online was talking about the fact they were at one of these college protests for Palestine, and they were asking the college kids at the protest if they could identify on a map where Gaza was. No, nobody.
I know I mean, look at Ukraine. How many people could find Ukraine on a map?
That's true.
And we put in what the American government under Biden and Trump have put in what $200 billion plus. So we've helped perpetuate the carnage in Ukraine that Trump says he wants to stop. And of course, he didn't stop it on day one, which he said he was going to do during the campaign. So he has a lot of work to do to get Ukraine and Russia to the peace table so they can iron out their differences.
All right, I had you on today because I wanted you to explain this whole tariff situation to our unwashed public here. But I got to do something before that, and you just touched on it about the financial independence. President Biden has come out of hiding this afternoon. I don't think it's happened yet. I checked about 15 minutes before we went on. He's going to give a speech apparently on Social Security. And this has kind of been a big bugaboo of yours. And from what I understand, well, the Democrats right now are going on and on about the fact that the Trump administration is going to curtail Social Security benefits, and they say they aren't. But that said, it appears that the way the system is currently set up, it's going to go bankrupt in about less than 10 years. Is that correct?
Well, what's going to happen is the trust fund, the so-called trust fund, will be empty, which means the federal government will only be able to pay about 80% of the promised benefits to the beneficiaries. Now, there's a whole bunch of problems with Social Security. First of all, it's involuntary. You must pay Social Security taxes. Your employee must pay Social Security taxes, and there's no account like a 401k or an IRA. The money that you pay in is immediately spent on current recipients. So the notion that working people are saving for their retirement is a big myth. What they're doing is funding the current benefits. So for all intents and purposes, Social Security is one big welfare program, which of course most people don't look at it that way. They look at it as an investment, which means an investment is voluntary, and Social Security certainly isn't voluntary. And people would be much better off if they save their own money, put it into any type of investment vehicle, especially like an index fund of the S&P 500, and over their working lifetime of 40, 50, 60 years, they would have much more in their own account than what Social Security is promising them. And by the way, that's the key word. Social Security is a promise. It's not a guarantee, because in 1960, the Supreme Court ruled that if you were a communist, which is what Mr. Nestor was denied his benefits, even though he paid into the Social Security system for 19 years. The Congress passed a bill, and the president signed it. I forgot which president, that said if you had communist affiliations, you could not be getting Social Security benefits. So that blows out of the water the whole notion that Social Security is yours. It's not yours. It's basically a promise by the federal government. They keep on changing it. They monkey around with it. And again, in a free society, we should not have a retirement program, a welfare program for retirees. It should be done through savings. That's what it means to be a responsible adult, saving for your retirement, saving for your health benefits.
First of all, that's a fascinating thing about the guy about the man who said about not being able to get his benefits because he said he was communist. I did not never heard that before.
Most people don't know this. This is why it's important to understand the history of these programs. And you see the lies that were told when the FDR administration officials were arguing before the Supreme Court. They were telling Congress one thing, they were telling the public another, they told the Supreme Court another, and the Supreme Court ruled it was constitutional. I, for the life of me, cannot find any constitutional authority in Article 1, Section 8 that says the federal government has an authority to tax working people and their employer in order to provide, quote, retirement benefits for the people. It's just not there. So that's the constitutional argument that people should have made back in the 1930s. They may have done so. I'd have to go back and see what the arguments were. But the point is, most of the federal budget is not authorized. And that is the constitutional crisis, Jim, we have in America today. And no one in Washington, no one in the talking heads on cable and talk radio are discussing. We have an unconstitutional federal budget. And that's why the federal government is spending more than $7 trillion a year. And that's why we've accumulated $36 trillion in debt.
Yes. And did I just read today that right now the annual deficit is about 7% of GDP? Is that correct?
Yeah, that number is not too relevant. What's relevant is how many dollars the federal government is taking in through taxes, how much it's spending, and the chronic deficits that we now have. I mean, there's no way we're going to get a balanced budget unless you cut spending massively. And that's what I wrote in my Substack today in, quote, honor of April 15th, tax day, is that we need to abolish the income tax and cut spending. And that's the formula to get to a free society, to a constitutional republic. And unfortunately, Trump is not doing that. What he's doing is trying to manage the U.S. economy through tariffs. And here's one of the major problems with Trump that, again, no one is talking about this. Trump thinks he's the CEO of America, Inc., that American corporations should follow his lead in where they should produce, in what part of the world they should produce, what taxes American people should pay on foreign goods coming in, which are called tariffs. So he thinks, because he's a business guy, that the United States economy is his business to manage. And there's nothing in the Constitution that gives the federal government the authority to do so. In fact, what we're seeing, Jim, today is the legacy of the Great Depression, when Herbert Hoover was president and the economy was declining, and he thought it was his responsibility to boost the economy, and he badgered business people with different rules and regulations. He got the Congress to increase taxes, and it was a total fiasco, and he got wiped out in the 32 election when FDR ran on a fiscal conservative platform. And what did he do when he got in? He did the same thing that Hoover did, and the Depression lasted a full decade. So the federal government cannot micromanage the economy. Trump apparently doesn't understand the basics of economics, that entrepreneurship, savings and investment to give us capital goods is the way to prosperity, not tariffs. He has this mistaken notion that tariffs will bring back production to America. Companies decide where to locate for a whole host of reasons: taxes, workforce, political stability, monetary stability. Those are things that factor into a business decision maker's conclusion as to where to locate their business. Even domestically, businesses are leaving high tax states like California, Illinois, New York, and New Jersey, and they're moving to the southeast. They're moving to Texas, moving to Nevada. So businessmen are making that decision, and women are making that decision here in America because they see that there are onerous rules and regulations and taxes in some states, and they say we can't make any money anymore, or we're making very little money, and we're moving out of our location right now. So again, Jim, this is easy to understand. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing, and I appreciate the opportunity to reach your audience with the message of free markets and limited government, and getting rid of as many taxes as quickly as possible, getting rid of most of federal spending as quickly as possible. And that would be the greatest boost to what Trump wants to call the golden age. We're not going to get a golden age by tariffs. And I think he's so mistaken on that, it's hard to believe that someone supposedly as astute as he is about the business world is making every error that the Democrats have made in the past.
Okay. So I have heard that floating around within the administration, they're playing with the idea of eliminating income tax. If you eliminated income tax, especially in the current contemporary setting, I mean, okay, income tax was started, what, 1905? Am I right?
No, 1913.
1913.
Yeah.
Started at 2%, right?
1% to 7%.
Right. Okay. So if you eliminated it, I mean, obviously, you're absolutely right. I mean, we spend way, way too much money. There's just no doubt about that altogether. But there are some things that, especially the military, which is authorized by the Constitution. How do we fund the government if we have no income tax?
Okay. The piece that I wrote for the Mises Institute, which is a condensed version of a much longer piece that's going into a book later this year or early next year on taxation. I talk about how we have a transition to a much more limited government than we have today. We don't have a limited government. That's the bottom line.
Obviously.
And so what I'm calling for is getting rid of the income tax and replacing it with a small excise tax or sales tax on purchases. And then you would have a small excise tax on corporate revenue. There would be no corporate income tax to file. So they would save a bundle of money on tax preparation. They would save a bundle of money on taxes, because when you're paying taxes on net income, that's a lot of money. But if you're paying just a small excise tax on your revenue, it's you're over it and done with. Then you have a small tax on housing sales, commercial real estate sales, stock sales, and you'd raise enough money to begin the transition to a limited government republic.
Okay, Murray, question.
Yeah.
Is a sales tax and what the Europeans call a value-added tax, are those the same thing?
No.
Okay.
The value-added tax is at each stage of production, from raw materials to the consumer. What I'm proposing is just a retail sales tax, excise tax, at the point of sale to the consumer. So just like we have sales taxes across the country, there are a few states that don't have any sales taxes, but it's basically you're done, you pay it once at the cash register, and that's it, or online.
And what do you figure how high would a federal sales tax have to be roughly?
Well, here's what I'm talking about. In conjunction with getting rid of the income tax, you've got to downsize the federal government. So on my Substack today, I have a graphic of the 2024 federal budget, which ended last September 30th. And on the right side is all the spending by the major categories. And on the left side are all the taxes that are used to raise the $5 trillion. First of all, we should get rid of the Department of Education and all aid to education. That saves $300 billion right away.
Right.
Then you get rid of foreign aid and military aid. That probably saves several $100 billion a year.
Right.
Then you can get rid of corporate welfare, which I don't know what that exact number is, but it's substantial. And then you start transitioning and getting rid of Medicaid. The way we get rid of Medicaid is through the creation or the construction of more nonprofit medical centers around the country. I support financially several of them in New Jersey and one here in Naples, Florida, where I live. And the one in Naples, Florida, the Neighborhood Health Clinic, doesn't accept a penny of taxpayer dollars. All the funds are raised through voluntary contributions.
Uh-huh.
That is the American way. The nonprofit sector should replace all the social services. We have so many social nonprofit out there, from food banks to literacy centers to the Salvation Army to Habitat for Humanity.
Well,
Everything.
would you agree with my statement about the fact I don't think the federal government should be giving money to any nonprofit organization at all?
Well, and the reason is the rationale is they get their money by people getting a tax deduction for contributions because they're a 501c3 tax exempt organization. So that's the way they should be raising money. And if people have more money in their own pocket, they will be more charitable. That's what the evidence says.
We're already the most charitable nation on earth. I mean, we give away
There's
a
no
lot of
question
money.
about it. The
Right.
statistic I heard years ago, I don't know if it's still true, is that 80% of the world's charitable contributions are made by Americans. So
Okay.
the philosophy of philanthropy is embedded in American society from this colonial times to the present. People support colleges, universities. They support medical centers. They support food banks. They support Salvation Army, Habitat for Humanity. The list goes on and on. Pregnancy crisis centers. I mean, there's so many nonprofits that do great work in the community. And as Peter Drucker wrote in the Wall Street Journal many years ago, the nonprofits that are not doing well, they should go out of business, just as a business should go out of business if they're not
Right.
serving consumer needs.
Right.
So again, the marketplace has a way of flushing out the bad actors, if you will, or the inefficient actors, whether it's in the private sector or the nonprofit sector. And Trump should make that address to the nation that the government does not create wealth. It destroys wealth through inflation, through regulation, through endless wars. And he should make that case and saying that we don't need a big military industrial complex. And one of the things he should be saying is that the first responsibility of the federal government is to keep the peace, to make sure that the American people are at peace with the rest of the world. That would ensure production, that would ensure greater consumption, that would ensure the use of nonprofits to help people in their local communities. And this is the point of, if we decentralize all these activities, you would have less bureaucracy in Washington, and you can cut the federal workforce to the bone. And you can take the national parks and give them to the states, and the states would be responsible for them. There'd be no federal dollars. The money would be raised through a nonprofit organization in the state, and they could raise the money nationally to make sure that the national parks are in good shape, or that the state parks.
All right, Murray.
Yeah.
I understand your criticisms of what's going on right now are completely legitimate and valid. I totally understand. But would you at least say that maybe they're doing better than previous administrations have thus far? I mean, they are talking about cutting the income tax. They are. What's another example? They're trying to come up with a system to save Social Security. I mean, you're right. The system itself is bogus. I totally agree with you. But if you're going to leave it in place, and right now, the problem, the way I see it, is it's become an emotional issue. People depend on Social Security. And then there's another thing I want to run by you too. So I totally get the thing about that it should be voluntary. But what do you, I mean, and this is, I'm really looking for your opinion here, because I can see this both ways. If right now, if it's not voluntary, there's a whole bunch of people in the United States that are either too undisciplined or too stupid to save their money. So I mean, is there a mechanism a federal mechanism other than Social Security, or do we just ignore those people and let them go by the wayside, or what do we do?
Well, I think here's where the employer comes into play. The employer's responsibility, I think, would be to educate their workforce about what it means to have a decent retirement. And they could bring in financial planners, certified financial planners, and explain to people, here's how you do it. You take part of your income, because you wouldn't be paying any Social Security taxes anymore. There'd be no more payroll taxes, and
Right.
you can put it into a exchange traded fund like the S&P 500. You'll be invested in the major corporations of America, and over 40, 50-year time horizon, those companies are going to grow. And so your rate of return, historically, we know the S&P 500 has grown 9% over the last 100 years.
Yeah. Right. Well,
So,
matter of fact, forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I'm under the impression that index funds annually generally beat like 80% of the prognosticators on the market.
oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, Warren Buffett said the average person should invest in an index fund, a broad-based index fund, and you're going to have the top companies in America, the Apples, the Microsofts, the Netflix, and so on and so forth, plus the smaller firms, medium-sized firms and smaller firms. So you're investing in America. I mean, that's the whole point of this
Yeah.
thing. You're investing in companies. They're going to take the money that is invested in them, not through the S&P 500, by issuing more shares or issuing bonds, and expand their businesses. And if they have much lower taxes or no corporate income tax, a lot of capital would be attracted from overseas to America and build plants in the United States and create good paying jobs here. So again, I think Trump is trying to do something wonderful for the country, but he's doing it, I think, the wrong way. I mean, the ends doesn't justify the means that he's doing. What
Yeah.
I'm suggesting is get the government out of the way as much as possible, lower taxes to attract capital, and the job creation would increase enormously. He has this fixation of manufacturing jobs, is wonderful. Well, if you look at the history of manufacturing jobs in the post-war period, we've gone from a manufacturing-oriented economy after World War II to a service-oriented economy, and some of those jobs pay well into the six figures. And look at the automobile industry. There are very few people working there now relative to what they were back in the 50s, because automation has made the workers more productive in the automobile industry. So
Right.
Trump, I don't know if he has a real good appreciation of how the U.S. economy has evolved the past 75 years since the end of World War II. And he should stop relying on people that are giving him bad advice on tariffs and spending and other issues. Right now, we are in fiscal 2025, which ends this September 30th. And there's a piece in the Wall Street Journal today showing that spending is rising faster than last year. So far, the Doge cuts haven't taken place because spending in the first 3 months of the Trump administration is still going up at a very substantial rate. So
So hold on.
unless
I want to make sure I got this, clarify this. So the problem isn't the Doge cuts are being offset by higher spending. Is that what you're saying?
well, or they haven't taken place yet, because
All right.
according to the graphic in the Wall Street Journal this morning, it shows that spending is increasing faster than last year. And so we're still in Biden's last budget, because this budget began October 1st of last year when he was still president. But Trump could make some adjustments to the budget, and it doesn't seem that there's going to be much adjustment. We will know on September or in October of this coming year what the actual budget numbers were for fiscal 25. Next year, fiscal 26, is Trump's first budget as president in this term. So we will see when he introduces a budget next year what it's going to look like compared to this year and the previous year. My guess is it's not going to be a cut that he's promising. And so that's why I'm not very optimistic that the cuts will materialize, because the cuts that have to take place is, with all the contentiousness that's going on colleges, universities, campuses around the country, he should just get rid of federal aid to higher education and let those
I'm totally with
colleges.
you on this. You know, the people at Harvard are bitching now, and Columbia is bitching, but the fact of the matter is they shouldn't be getting any money in the first place.
Well, they have a $50 billion endowment. What are they using it for?
I know.
They should use it for the research for their faculty. They should use it to scholarships for students, and that's it.
Right. I don't understand it either. You came up I had, Don Zorro, my friend Don Zorro, intelligence operative was on last night, and you came up in the conversation. I can't remember what we were talking about, but I was talking about the fact that you pointed out to me about the fact that, when the stock market crashed in October 29, lost 20% of its, value in a week, and Herbert Hoover was president, and the basic, not premise, but the basic conclusion is that that Hoover wasn't really doing anything to stimulate the economy, and he lost the election because of that. And Roosevelt came in, and he appeared to do stuff, and the appearance placated the populace. But in actuality, you pointed out he actually did more harm than good. Am I right about that?
Well, absolutely. Hoover basically badgered business people to keep wages up when there was deflation going on. When you have deflation in the economy, that means prices are going down. If prices are going down, then your costs have to go down, including labor, in order to make a profit. And so Hoover said the prosperity of America is dependent upon high wages, which is totally bizarre. Wages reflect the productivity of workers, and it's up to the business people to decide what the wages should be in order for them to make a profit. In fact, when I first began teaching at Ramapo College, I taught a basic economics course, and in the textbook there was a chart, and it showed conclusively the sectors of the economy that reduced wages the most had very little unemployment. The sectors that had very little wage cuts had the greatest unemployment, like the automobile industry, like the machinery industry. It was a perfect chart showing that if companies keep wages up in a time of contraction in the economy, you're going to get what? Surplus labor. That's called unemployment. And that's exactly what happened. And Roosevelt just piggybacked on what Hoover was doing. And the Depression lasted a full decade, which is astonishing, since the longest depression we had prior to that was about 4 years in the 1890s,
Right.
the Panic of 1893. That lasted until 1896.
Based on what you told me and what I know, if he had done the right thing, it would have been over in like 2 years, right?
Absolutely. I mean, all he had to do was let the market settle out. The stock market kept on going down, down, down till it bottomed out in 1932. It was down 89%. And people were wiped out. And we had 25% unemployment when Roosevelt came in. And the banks were collapsing because of fractional reserve banking. People wanted to get their money out of the bank. The banks didn't have the money because they loaned it out. And so this is the problem with fractional reserve banking. And then Roosevelt protected the depositors with FDIC. And so the banks were able to continue a policy that is what? Unsustainable. And so what we've had since then is the Federal Reserve stepping in order to prop up the financial system. So when you have the Federal Reserve pumping money in and asset prices go through the roof, whether it's real estate, whether it's artwork, whether it's stocks, prices go wild, and then they correct when the Fed realizes it has to tighten up on the money supply in order to prevent inflation from accelerating. And so we saw this in the late 70s and early 80s. And then we saw this recently when the inflation rate went to 9% and the Fed tightened up and raised interest rates in order to cool off the economy. But they didn't cool it enough, and that's why inflation is still stubbornly around 3%. So again, monetary analysis, economic analysis, public spending analysis all come together to explain why the federal government cannot manage the economy. This is one of the great insights of the Austrian school, by the way, at Mises.org, where they show conclusively that government cannot manage the economy. In other words, central planning doesn't work, whether it was done in the Soviet Union or it's done in a democracy, quote, a democracy like the United States.
It's never worked. It's never worked anywhere it's been tried. But the problem that you have, if you want to call it a problem, it really isn't. It's a problem of perception. And that is people can't wrap their mind around the invisible hand. It's like, because the invisible hand doesn't make any rational sense, but it works. I mean, it does work. People self-organize. It's like it's really amazing, and it's hard to explain to people. I mean, some woman wrote a book a couple of years ago called "The Visible Hand." Well, no, the visible hand is central planning, and it doesn't work. It
You
just
know what the
doesn't
real
work.
problem is, Jim? And I've given a lot of thought to this, and since I've been researching the economy for about 50 years now. We are living under the legacy of the Great Depression, and the dirtiest four-letter word explains what's going on here. People don't want to assume risk in their lives, and
Very
so
well
that's
put.
why
Yeah,
you that's why you have all these government programs to quote protect people
right.
in the workplace. I'm talking about financially,
Yeah.
and also with OSHA and all these other alphabet soup agencies that supposedly
Well,
protect people.
if you're going to bring that up to the modern era, now we're not even talking about financial safety. We're talking about safety for everything.
Yeah,
This whole concept's actually blown up. You're right; it's gotten worse.
this is why I wrote a piece on Substack called "Condemnation." People want to be protected from the vicissitudes of life. We have risk every time we get out of bed in the morning.
Yeah,
And we have risk in the marketplace. People lose their jobs, they lose customers, they lose their businesses. And if you don't face the reality of what's going on, you're going to wind up sometimes being a basket case. Let's face it, people have difficulty coping with adversity. That's the key issue here. How do you deal with adversity? One way you deal with adversity financially is you saved for that proverbial rainy day. And when I was working up in Massachusetts in the investment field, one of the things we advocated or recommended to clients is to keep at least 6 months of living expenses in liquid in liquid assets, whether it's money market funds or treasury bills or savings accounts, because you never know. In today's economy, you should probably keep a year in savings and then start building up your retirement account. That is just common sense, Jim. And people aren't taught that. Young people aren't taught that because the key concept in our economy today is spending is driving the economy. No, it's not. It's saving and investment drives the economy. So you can then be a consumer. So as I pointed out to my students, I can't consume anything as a college professor unless I first get a paycheck for my teaching services.
yeah.
So I teach, that's my production. I get a paycheck. I paid my mortgage. I paid the other bills, and I saved out of my paycheck that went into my retirement account. That's the way it works. That's what financial independence means. That's what financial responsibility means. That's what it means to be an adult.
I would say though that the problem is that idea is not very romantic, and that's the reason people don't do it, and that's bullshit.
Well, that's it, because the government teaches people that it's all about spending. That you hear this on the news programs, the financial news program. 70% of the U.S. economy is consumer spending. So people have it in their head that consumer spending is the way to drive an economy. What drives an economy is production. You cannot consume first unless you produce, and
Yeah,
you need to have the government get out of the way for the men and women entrepreneurs to produce. And if you do that, then you have an incredible productivity going on. And look at the history of the United States for the past 250 years since the Declaration of Independence. The economy has grown by leaps and bounds in spite of the depression, the other things, inflation, the regulations. Entrepreneurs are very resilient, they're very flexible, but at one time, you could get a breaking point, which you've had in other countries around the world, the hyperinflation, where the currency collapses, or there's so many regulations that people don't want to produce, and they either move out of the country and they take their brain power and their expertise to other parts of the world. So what attracts people to the United States is the relative freedom we have here to open
yeah,
up a business. And
right.
I remember hearing somebody say years ago, you could fly into Hong Kong 9 o'clock in the morning. By 5 p.m., you could have your business opened up.
Yeah,
That's unheard of in virtually the rest of the
right.
world.
I've heard
And
in Singapore, you only have to fill out a one-page form, and you got a business. That's what I've
well,
heard.
that's the beauty of having an open economy, is that it gives people the ability to be productive in whatever business they have. And so, again, today, a lot of people don't even leave their house for their business because they work online. They have an e-commerce business. And that's what happened during COVID, by the way. People really opened up a lot of
Yeah,
businesses.
right.
A lot of brick and mortar businesses went online. I remember reading that one furniture store didn't have an online presence. When COVID hit, they couldn't open up their showroom, so they went online and they kept their business afloat.
This is just a total side subject here, but man, I gotta tell you, Murray, I would not want to be in the brick and mortar retail business right now because you're absolutely right. The one of the few good things that came out of COVID is that people is remote, basically remote work. Like what we're doing right now. I mean, this was available, but it totally accelerated that phenomena. It was going to happen sooner or later anyway, but it happened on the quick because people couldn't leave the house. You know,
Well, interestingly enough, before COVID hit, a few months before COVID hit, I gave a presentation at Ramapo College, October 2019, and I said, given the work landscape that I see, I think we're going to see more and more people work remotely, and the 4-day work week will be a reality. And here we are,
yeah,
uh, post COVID, and so many people are working remotely. Listen, it saves them a ton of money by not having to drive in. It saves them gasoline, parking, tolls, you name it. People love it. Plus, they don't have to fight the traffic and so on and so forth. Plus, they have more time with their kids if they have a family, more time with their spouse or partner, whatever the case may be.
right.
So the internet has made this all possible. If we didn't have the remote work availability during COVID, the economy would have collapsed. I mean, it would just if they didn't open up the economy. And so that was probably one of the biggest mistakes of the Trump administration, is to have the lockdown for 2 weeks, and then states piggybacked on that, and then the rest is history. You had so many lockdowns around the country, and it was done on a haphazard basis. The big box stores were open, but the mom and pop stores on Main Street were closed. So that was a gross violation of due process and
Right,
equal
it
protection
was.
under the law.
And if anything, this would also be a violation of due process, but it should have been, if you're going to do anything, it should have been the opposite, shouldn't it?
Well, and the gyms were closed, and we know exercise is probably one of the best ways to prevent illness.
Right.
So these jerky governors locked down their states. They prevented gyms from opening up. It just shows you how ridiculously idiotic they were, and they didn't listen to the gym people. They didn't listen to the naturopaths. They didn't listen to the nutritionists. They just gave the same tired old narrative that you got to take these shots. And now evidence is coming out. These shots are causing all sorts of health problems around the world.
I've said this on the show before, but it bears repeating. The Cleveland Clinic has pretty much proved, they did a survey of 50,000 of their patients and came to the conclusion you were more likely to get COVID if you had a booster shot than if you didn't. And that means the boosters. I won't talk about the original vaccines because I don't really know, but the booster shots failed. There's no doubt about it.
Well, this is why I've been stressing, Jim. There are two important relationships that have been undermined by the government outside the family: the doctor-patient relationship and the teacher-student relationship. So you have bureaucracies in medical care. You have huge bureaucracies in education.
Yeah.
And we need to get rid of the bureaucracies and allow the practitioners to do what they do best: provide medical care and to teach. Instead, we have an army of bureaucrats that don't provide any health care, no medical care, no education. They're just behind the education. They're in the education bureaucracy and the medical bureaucracy. And that's why costs for education and medical care have skyrocketed the last 30, 40 years.
Murray, is this just a function though of literally too many people in society? Because that seems to be where bureaucracy comes from. I mean, how do you fight this giant, a ship of state that can barely turn at all? I mean, you could. All right, well, let me preface this. I think you set me straight here in a previous broadcast. There's 2.1 million people that work for the federal government, non-military.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, now you and I've run businesses, and you have too. I've suggested that you could probably get rid of about 85% of them, and that no one would ever notice. The government would run just fine. You could
Well,
probably do it on 250,000 people.
yeah, I mean, people are basically um, pushing paper and writing out checks in Washington or reading grants. Again, government doesn't create any wealth. It dissipates wealth. That is the basic lesson of economics. And we need to get back to uh, basic principles that a free market economy is the best way to reduce poverty, increase real incomes, and keep the peace. I mean, we have peace in America in the sense that we don't have tariffs between states. Could you imagine in Florida here, Governor DeSantis says, you know what? The people in Florida are getting ripped off by the auto companies because there are no auto companies in Florida. Therefore, we're going to put a huge tariff on autos coming into Florida. And if
Yeah,
they come to Florida, there'll be no tariffs. I mean, how stupid would that be? Would
right.
anyone take them seriously? Well, expand that to the president of the United States and saying that to the rest of the world. Come here, otherwise we're going to tax you. And
Okay,
of course,
what
it's
about?
not them. It's the American people that are being taxed with the tariffs.
But I'm gonna play devil's advocate here. So his position is that the tariffs other countries are charging us are too high, and this appears to be a negotiating tactic. I don't think he's, other than the possibility of China, which has been ripping us off blind for years. I don't think he's really serious about uh, enforcing these high tariffs. I mean, they're just negotiating positions to get other countries to lower theirs, and
Yeah.
in that case, isn't that necessarily, that's not a bad thing, is it?
Well, David Stockman in his columns on Contra Corner, he points out that tariffs are really low around the world, except a few countries that may have high tariffs. But the United States producers don't face many tariffs around the world, and he documents this in a table that he put together. That we have free trade agreements with Mexico and Canada. We have basically free trade with other countries. And the numbers that he put together in that chart on quote Liberation Day, April 2nd, were bogus. They were not based upon real tariff numbers. So where we got these numbers from is fuzzy math, that Stockman points out, and other people have pointed out. That was a good case study of misinformation by Trump about what the
Yeah,
tariffs are from
and
other countries.
hold, I gotta stop you because I'm a dork and I don't know crap, and even I noticed that. But so, what was the point of him doing that? That's the part I don't get. Why did he do that?
Well,
If they,
he wants to have a rationale for these quote reciprocal tariffs, but the tariffs are already low. I mean, I would get rid. I would say, come to America and sell your goods, and there won't be any tariffs. And you know what? We're going to reduce corporate income taxes to so low that you're going to want to come to America to open up your business. That would be the incentive. That would be the carrot for foreign companies to come to America. And the other thing, he thinks in terms of nations as trading partners. No, it's people and businesses are trading partners. They're the ones that trade. Nations
yeah,
don't trade. Nations are just political entities. They're not economic entities, unless, of course, they own a business like they do in China. Of course,
right.
we have that in the United States as well. We have the schools are basically owned by local governments,
Yeah,
and
that's true. Yeah.
fortunately, we don't have. And we have municipal water supplies and things like that. But the point is, Trump has this very strange notion that the nation state is the main economic actor in the world. No, it's not. The nation state is a geographic political entity that has sovereignty, and that each nation is works at the behest of all the special interests in that nation, or in the case of China, the Communist Party. But even the Communist Party isn't as powerful as they think they are, because in the final analysis, Jim, markets are more powerful than governments.
Well,
That
right. The Chinese won't recognize that at all. I mean, your complaints about what the Trump administration doing are totally valid. But I mean, you go over to China, they don't even want to address that question. I mean, it's like, they want to, it's centralized control over there. And the fact that and this really pisses me off, and I've guessed and come on the show regularly talking about this. China has literally been stealing from us. I mean, our intellectual property, you can go out on the street in Beijing and buy a copy of Windows 11 for $5. I mean,
yeah.
and that's nuts. That has to stop. So I
So
kind
That's what Microsoft has to do to go into China and say this is theft. And if you're not going to recognize our intellectual property rights, then it's up to Microsoft to do something about it. It's not up to the federal government to do something about it because they have no standing in China. It's Microsoft that is the aggrieved party here. It's not the federal government. So it's the companies that are getting ripped off that should go into China and make the case in their court system. And if their court system says, take a hike, then Microsoft has two things. They can refuse to sell to Chinese entities, or they just have to lump it because they're certainly making a lot of money anyway. And that's the real problem, is that in a world where there are thieves and bandits and crooks, that's one of the things you have to deal with. And if you can't get any satisfaction to the court system, then you're not going to bomb them because you don't have the capability of doing that. But
Right.
which would be a little bit egregious. But anyway, this is the risk of the marketplace. People steal.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because what surprises me is how many the companies in America just won't throw their hands up and say, we're just not going to sell to China anymore. I don't understand why more people, I mean, it's kind of starting, companies are starting to do it, but everyone's so attracted to the greed of easy money, or what they thought was easy money. It really wasn't, but they thought that, like, look at this giant market. They're going to let us come here, but we got to give up 51% of our company. I mean, it's kind of crazy, Okay, so, well, we're almost out of time, and I was going to try and come up with a question here to end this, because this has been extremely illuminating. I really appreciate this. You've done a very good job explaining some of this stuff. Okay, last question. So, I understand your objection to the way Trump's handling this, but once again, I guess let's conclude on this. Is he at least doing stuff better than? This is my last question. So you pointed out, and other people point out too, that in some ways he's using the analogy of running his private company and transferred that analogy to the federal government, and basically that doesn't work, does it?
No, it doesn't.
That's the problem, isn't it?
That, I think, is the major criticism I have about Trump, is he's trying to micromanage the U.S. economy and the global economy. It's not his job to restructure global trade. That's not his job. Trade comes about naturally because we, as the Declaration says, we have the right to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that, to me, means freedom, the freedom to act in the marketplace to satisfy our goals and preferences.
Murray, I can't thank you enough. I love talking to you, and the public needs to hear this stuff. So I'm glad we can put it out. I'm glad you're doing this.
Thanks, Jim. It's always great to be with you for a good, comprehensive discussion of the issues.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Okay.
Hi, all. Jim Peters again for Conk News. Let me tell you one of the greatest things about Conk News. It's free. It's completely and totally free. You don't need to register. You don't need to log in, subscribe, none of that stuff. Sure, they run a few ads on the front page, but if you're an old fogey like me, you might actually appreciate this, because when you check out Conk News at conk.com, you'll probably notice that it's the closest thing to an old-fashioned hard copy newspaper that you'll find online. The latest up-to-the-minute news from 75 high-quality sources collected every 3 hours, all laid out with photos and headlines directly from the articles. And when you click on a story, you go directly to that story. No ad page, no interstitial page, none of that stuff. This is the way online news is meant to be. And did I mention that it's completely free? Seriously, how much of the stuff in America is free now, right? That's of quality anyway. So check this out for yourself. It's at conk.com, CONK.com. Conk News. Our thanks to Murray Sabrin there for just a fascinating discussion. Nice to have people around there that smart, isn't it? Welcome to part 2 of our show. As I said at the top, we're not taking phone calls tonight. I got a few things I want to talk about. We're going to take phone calls on Thursday. We're not doing a show tomorrow night. On Wednesday night, Thursday, Jonathan Lockwood, military historian, is going to be joining us. That's Thursday. We will take phone calls. No, we're pre-taping his interview, so we won't be taking phone calls for his interview, but we will afterwards. So, any rate, I don't know how many watched our show last night. Don Zora was on, and people love him, and for good reason. Guy's very well spoken. Him and I were talking, and that's what we do. It's a talk show. And about Taylor Lorenz. Now, you've probably heard about this woman. She's a former staffer at the Washington Post, former columnist there. She's like 42, 43 years old, I think. She looks like she's 30. I have to say, she looks extremely young. I don't understand how she got her job. I mean, this woman does not seem to be particularly bright. That's all there is to it. So she goes on CNN a few days ago, and she's talking about Luigi Mangione, this guy who shot the United Health Care CEO in the back on the street in Manhattan. Killed him. And he's in custody, of course. And it is amazing. I mean, this is what we were talking about with Don, about the fact there's a whole bunch of people, and they almost seem to be entirely liberals, who seem to think that this guy's some sort of hero. Now, apparently because of healthcare, I don't know. Now the amazing thing is, and this goes back to, we're going back now to 2012. This is Obamacare, which they passed. Now, Obamacare doesn't work. Now, the reason Obamacare doesn't work is it's a bureaucratic nightmare. It wasn't the intent was good. The intent was good. It does not do what it's supposed to do, which is lower health costs for lower income people. That's what it's supposed to do. It doesn't do that at all. Matter of fact, in half the cases, it lowers healthcare costs for affluent people. It's completely willy-nilly. It's a failure. I've always said this law is either going to be eventually repealed or will be changed beyond recognition, so that the name is still there, but it does something completely different, one or the other, because it doesn't work the way it is now. But you go back to 2012 when they were talking about this, and consistently over 85% of the American public said they were happy with their health insurance. In other words, they fixed a problem that didn't exist. And as far as I can tell, and this is a whole nother discussion, this is not what I want to talk about, they fixed it because they want to take control of the healthcare system. That was the goal, to take complete control over it and then non-privatize it. In other words, so they came up with a solution or a problem that wasn't there. And that was that people weren't happy with their health insurance, and people were not. And this continues the present day, where everyone thinks that the health insurance companies are evil. And yeah, you can point out some really, really terrible decisions insurance companies have made. Yeah, there's plenty of them. But the problem is, with 330 million people in this country, there's at least 200 million people on health insurance, probably a lot more, at least. So, you can come up with 12 examples of people getting screwed, but the vast majority of people are not getting screwed. And this gets back to what Murray and I were talking about in the previous segment, about the fact that the bureaucracy of the United States have gotten so huge that things fall through the cracks constantly. This is actually the reason you don't want, now I'm talking about something I don't want to talk about, but I'm going to talk, or I didn't plan on. You don't want the government running the healthcare system. First of all, because it completely eliminates any chance. There's no competition. It's their way or the highway. Now, right now, one of the biggest problems with the insurance industry is the competition is limited. It's limited by geography. It's limited by all sorts of other factors. And that, I'm not the only person who said this. That has to be fixed, because if there was more direct competition, costs would come down. There's no doubt about that. And that's one of the biggest problems with the system right now. But it would be worse if the government ran it, because very simply, it's a giant freaking bureaucracy. They're not beholden to anybody, and they have no incentive to change or do anything, which is the reason, You're talking about all the stuff that Doge is doing. That's the problem. Exactly, because there's no one to stop ineptitude or actually inefficiency. There's no reason to stop it. And that's why you don't want the government running. Well, actually, you don't want the government running anything. You don't. The government should fund the military, like Murray said. The government should probably fund the military, and that's it. But at any rate, so this Luigi Mangione guy, he shot, and I can't remember the guy's name, Brian something, but he's from Minneapolis too. He's from a town here because United Healthcare is actually headquartered here. We have quite a few. This is the 15th largest city in the United States, and we have more than our share of Fortune 500 companies here. I once saw, if you watch the show at all, I bitch and moan about winter. I hate it. I hate it. And I grew up in a small town in Minnesota. I moved away when I was 21. I thought I was never going to come back here. I really thought that. Well, God has different plans, But the reason I brought that up is because some headhunter once said Minneapolis is the hardest place to get people to move to and the hardest place to get them to leave. Because once you get here, the quality of life is extremely good. And even though we have a loony Democratic legislature, we are not yet been taken over completely by the Democratic machine. Although it seems inevitable, but we're not Massachusetts, we're not California, and we're not New York. We're not that yet. But I don't know. We'll see. So, I brought that up because he's from town here. So all those people, who are basically lionizing this guy, and Taylor Lorenz is one of them. And I don't have to tell you about this. There's all sorts of women who have romanticized this man because apparently he's pretty good looking. I mean, I'm not, I guess he is. And she said that same thing on CNN about and also said that he seemed like intrinsically, I think the quote was, he was a morally good individual. He was a morally good individual that not only murdered somebody, he shot them in the back. This guy's walking down the street, and the next thing he knows, he's dead. I mean, he didn't even have the courtesy to look the guy in the eye and shoot him, I mean, it's really, really cowardice crap. It really is. And so Taylor has been rightfully raked over the coals for this because, like I said, I do not understand how this woman ever even found work. I mean, she's not a particularly good writer. She's crazy. I'm just going to go on and say that she's a lunatic. She's nuts. And so I'm talking to Don, and I said, Don, I understand why 16-year-old girls think this way. Don's talking about the fact that the Luigi's attraction is that he's a quote-unquote bad boy and that women like bad boys. And I said, well, Don, I understand why 16-year-old girls think this way, but I don't understand why 40-year-old women do. And he said, well, Jim, it's obvious. He said, they're 16-year-old girls. And so that got me thinking last night, about the fact that, there's 8 billion people on the planet. Like I said, there's 330 million people in the United States. Now, I've done several different jobs over the course of my life here. I've run a few companies. The one thing that I had the hardest time wrapping my mind around, and I finally did do this, but way late. I mean, I was in my late 50s before I truly got this, is the size of the market and of the American market. It's you probably cannot conceive of the fact there's 330 million people that need to buy stuff. And that's the reason we sell a lot of everything. Not only that, we are the richest country in the world too, which is, I don't want to repeat the discussion Murray and I had, just recent part one of the show, but that's one of the reasons everybody wants to sell here. We're not the largest country on the planet. China is, in terms of population, but we do have the most money, and we spend it. We spend it a lot. And running companies, I have to tell you, that's the hardest thing I had to come to terms with. I mean, you can kind of intellectually understand, there's a lot of people here, but then you have to really understand the emotional aspect of the fact that every single one of those people needs a place to live. They need a blanket, they need burgers or something to eat. Every single one of them, all 330 million of them, and they're all from infants to 120 years old, or 115, I guess. My mother's 100. My mother's going to be 101 in a few months, but mother's still walking around, still causing trouble. So it's actually unbelievable. Uh, but so my point, I want to get back to this thing about Taylor Lorenz. There's 330 million people in our country alone and 8 billion people on the planet. There's a lot of people who have been campaigning for the fact we should have less people. Now, I got to tell you, we deal with the UFO question here regularly, and if you listen to the abduction scenarios by people who say they've been abducted, and I'm going to get off on a sidetrack here too. According to Gallup, and I think this poll is about 5 years ago, they did a poll, and they both directly and indirectly tried to figure out how many people had in the United States had been abducted by aliens, or claimed to, or think they were, or maybe possibly were, and won't even come to terms with it. In other words, they both asked direct and indirect questions. They came to the conclusion after processing all that data that about 2% of the American populace had been abducted. Well, that's 7 million people. And you're thinking, well, that's impossible. You can't. Well, it's not impossible if you've got half a million spacecraft here, and that sounds impossible. But I don't know if it is. But here's my point. My point is, all sorts of abduction experiencers say that they've asked, and the scenario is almost always the same. You get abducted, and usually in a rural area, hardly ever in a city, although it does happen, and usually at night, but not always. Sometimes it happens during the day, and there's usually no witnesses, but sometimes there are. I know that's you never hear about that, but that's true. There are people who have been abducted who are witnesses on the ground that see it. So the general scenario is you get in the spacecraft and they do medical tests on you. And why they do that is a question for another time. But they're usually pretty cold and businesslike while they're doing that. But a lot of the abductees have said that after the procedure is over, they kind of warm up. And a lot of times they ask the abductees, is there anything you want to know about us? And some people have asked, well, what should the human race do? And the number one answer to that across the board has been have more babies. That's what they say. And the reason they say that is because apparently they have this thing, and I'm not the only person talking about this, and there's more than a few abductees who have talked about this, that human bodies are containers for souls. And I've gotten conflicting reports from people who talk about this, who say that humans might be relatively special in that sense, that we have souls, or the fact that we might not be, but still, human bodies contain souls, and the bodies aren't that important. The souls are. Now, where the hell am I going with this? Okay, here's where I'm going with this. There's 8 billion people on the planet. So we all have a soul, right? And according to the aliens, it's distinct from our bodies. It's not part of our brain per se. Matter of fact, the best analogy I've heard, and more and more people are talking about this, that it's like a signal, and we're receivers. We're basically radios, and our soul is beamed into our bodies basically by some sort of radio transmission or something like that. That's the best analogy I've heard. And so some souls apparently are older than others, and there's a long time, what's the word I'm looking for, scenario, or not myth, but that you've heard the term old soul. You've heard that, and that's been legion. It's been around for a millennia, it seems. And we seem to have some sort of unconscious understanding of this. But the problem is, you look at a woman like Taylor Lorenz, who seems to be seriously an idiot, and I don't know if people's brains works much differently. from one person to another. I know obviously some do, because apparently there's mental illness too. You have to understand that. But I don't know if the brains work much differently, but there's a possibility that humans, different souls, have different experiences throughout multiple lives. And this is the part I have to get into this too, because, as a matter of fact, I'm hoping to have more guests on to talk about this. I mean, there's been people who've done research now about reincarnation, especially among young children, because children talk about their past lives. The amazing thing is, Ian Stevenson, who did the original research on this at the University of Virginia, he said that by the age of 5, virtually everybody forgets about it. So he was talking to kids who basically had just learned to talk. Now, here's the scenario. I don't know how he fell into this. I did read in his book, he did explain it. I can't really remember. He started to get calls from parents asking them. He said, "My son or my daughter says they lived in China in 900 AD or something like that, and I don't I'm wondering if my child is crazy." And so he would go talk to these children, and he would ask them very direct questions like, "Who were you? What was your name? Where did you live? Where do you remember your house? What did you do for a living? Tell me the names of your relatives." Blah blah blah. Very specific questions. The amazing thing is, in 70% of the instances, he talked to 700 kids, all under the age of 5, or actually 4, really, between the ages of 3 and 4 years old. In 70% of the instances, that information actually checked out. Those people that he said that these kids said they were real. And they were related to the people they said they were, and they lived in the town they said they lived in. And this is almost all entirely way before the internet. Most of these interviews were done in the 1960s. So it would be virtually impossible for these kids, in most instances anyway, to make this stuff up or to be fed this information even, because the average person, before the internet, before 1990, couldn't get a hold of this. So the point is, those kids talk about souls and their lives. And so I look at a woman like Taylor Lorenz, and I'm thinking, well, here's a person who hasn't been around very long. I mean, that's the reason she's stupid. And there's a whole bunch of people like her. But the problem, like my boyfriend Bill O'Reilly likes to talk about on TV, Jeff Meyer, who owns Kong News, he calls Bill O'Reilly my boyfriend. But like he says, I mean, if you watch O'Reilly on a regular basis, this is a constant theme of his, and that is people believe what they want to believe. The problem is humans have belief systems, and it's almost impossible to change them, which is terrible. Which is, of course, the reason we have a dichotomy, duopoly of political thought in the United States. Now, I would say, I'm going to tell you something about me that may sound like a boast, but actually, this is a curse. It's not. It's nothing to brag about. I apparently don't seem to have a belief system. I only believe stuff if I've seen evidence that it's true. And that goes for both like the physical world and also systems. Like, unless you can show me that something works, I won't believe it until I see it. And so you're thinking, well, Jesus, you're on the inner tube talking about UFOs and aliens all the time. But here's the deal with that. And I've said this before. 2017, the government, actually 2020, the government finally came out and said the UFOs are real. And all my friends are saying, how did you know? How did you know? It wasn't a feeling I had. It wasn't a guess. It's because I had been reading for 20 years. There was an enormous amount of evidence. And as I said on the broadcast a couple nights ago, or last week somewhere, where I was talking about the fact, what I call the 5% rule, which Stanton Friedman, the famous UFO researcher, he came up with that. The 5% rule is that 95% of all UFO evidence is bogus. 95% of it. People either misconstrued something, they mistook an aircraft for something else. Not necessarily like illicit or bogus, just mistakes. People make mistakes. And then there's you have hoaxes too. You have people that are trying to fool the public. So 95% of all UFO information is bogus. The problem is the 5% that's left is enormous. That's the problem. Even if you reject 95% of it. You're still with mountains of evidence. And I'm reading about this and looking at this stuff over the years. I'm thinking, well, no, this is obvious. Anybody who delved into this, which is true, almost every reporter that ever bothers to look into this ends up basically becoming a quote unquote believer just because of all the damn evidence, and that's the reason it wasn't my belief system. It wasn't something, a feeling or emotion or anything I had. It's freaking evidence, and I don't have time to go through all of it here because it would take me like 15 years, but so that's where I come from on this whole thing, and so, all right, now I've lost my train of thought, which is terrible. Oh, we were talking about souls, and so, you look at a woman like Taylor Lorenz, and she probably has not been around the universe very long. Oh, we were talking about belief systems. That was my point. And it's almost impossible to shake people. I look at the belief system of the human psyche as kind of the appendix of the human psyche. Maybe 2,000 years ago it served some purpose. Now it doesn't. All it does is screw people up, But the problem with this is, and this takes time, most people aren't willing to test their beliefs. Like let's say you have a political belief about the fact that it would be best if the government ran healthcare. Now I will tell you this not based on what I think, but based on experience, that's probably not going to work out. Am I positive? No, I'm not. The other thing I'll tell you too, I can sit here and tell you I'm a libertarian conservative, but to me, it's inevitable that the world will fall into socialism in the next 500 years because socialism makes sense. Here's the deal. Socialism makes sense if you have no scarcity of resources. And that will happen at some point. We won't have any scarcity. For the time being, it's right now it's trash. But if I keep talking about these like the replicator system on Star Trek, Captain Picard goes to get an Earl Grey tea hot out of the machine, and it looks like a microwave, but it literally it fabricates his teacup and his tea out of thin air, and actually out of bogus atomic parts, basically. But we're going to have that. I mean, the 3D printers now is a primitive form, a very primitive form of that same thing. And it would work on the same basic concept too. It simply would be on the atomic level. Now, right now, we can't do that. We can't. But you give us, I'm guessing in 100 years, 200 for sure, we'll be able to do that stuff. That's my guess. And at that point, anybody can have anything they want. You'll have a microwave size one in your house, and down at the city hall, they'll have one the size of a large room, and you want a new car, you probably just put in an order. You wouldn't have to pay for anything, I mean, that's going to get really crazy how that works because you're still going to need people to work. I mean, you still need some people to do some stuff, if only not just to run these machines. So this is beyond my comprehension at this point. But my point is, basically economic theory is based on the concept of scarcity. And when we get to the point where physical items are the same as digital files are now, where you can copy them endlessly perfectly, we will get to that point. We won't need capitalism anymore. It will become an option. But I just want to point out, we're at least 200 and probably 500 years away from that. We are. So that's my point. My point is belief systems screw people up. They really do. And everybody thinks they're right. And here's the problem, folks. Just because you had an idea doesn't mean it's right. And a lot of people mistake this. They think, oh, I thought of something, therefore it must be true. No, if you can, go out and test it out. But that scares the crap out of most people. Most people do not want their ego is too fragile to have their ideas tested. So Taylor Lorenz is a moron, but in some ways she can't help it. Now the problem is we can't have people. She shouldn't be in her position. I mean, if she was a moron and working as a clerk at the DMV office, maybe that's fine. But she's not writing for the Washington Post anymore, but she wrote for the Washington Post for I think 10 or 12 years. She did not belong in that job. And I don't understand why, I mean, I really hate to say this, and I'm going to get crap for saying it, but normally I would not say this, but this is the type of thing where you do wonder if sexual favors were involved. She was so bad at this and still is that, how does a woman like that get a job doing that? I have no idea. Well, like I said, maybe one. I have one idea, and that's a terrible thing for me to say. I know, but I can't think of anything else. Not only off the top of my head, I've been thinking about this for a couple of days now. So anyway, that's kind of where we are as a society. The and so here's the wrap up of this whole thing. Uh, we are different souls in different points in our development, and the only thing that saves humanity from complete utter collapse is love. And I'm totally serious about this. There's not enough love in the world, and especially among your families. And I've said this before, if your father raped you as a child, I understand why you don't want to talk to him anymore. I do, but for most people, I look at families all over the place, and I see people that are estranged from their brothers and sisters, from their parents, all sorts of. Usually, it's just petty crap. Usually, now you're right. Like I said, some people may have a really good reason for not talking to some of their relatives, but most people don't. So I can't explain to you whether that's true of you or not if you're in this predicament, but think about it at any rate, because love. I know I sound like a broken record, and I sound like a cliche. Love makes the world go round. It does, you know. So try to be thoughtful to the people you deal with, even people professionally and people you're not really attached to. You know, just try to make the world a better place. That's all I can say. Luigi Mangione didn't. He's not making the world a better place. I don't know if the guy deserves a death penalty, but he should be thrown in jail at the very least and never be let out. He shouldn't. So, and like I said, that does that. I might, I might take some solace in the fact that Taylor Lorenz is a young soul, but that doesn't mean she's right either. So, anyway, that's what I wanted to say tonight. We're off tomorrow. Jonathan Lockwood's our guest on Thursday. We will take your phone calls on Thursday night. I guess I just want to talk about that. That's all. I really appreciate you guys watching very, very much. Good night, Esperanza. Good night, Uncle Donnie. And good night to you, wherever you are. We're off tomorrow night. We'll see you on Thursday night, everybody. Take care.